following program is intended for mature audiences.
Rudy's Revelation.
And you must make a friend of horror. Horror and moral terror are your friends. If they are not, then they are enemies to be feared.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast today. It is January 2nd, 2025. Welcome to the new year. So today we're going to be talking about what is on everyone's lips. Terror attacks against the United States. Now, we're all familiar of what happened recently in the overthrow of the Syrian government by Islamic militants. And at the same time, Joe Biden was talking about Islamophobia. And I predicted then that we will now see, at the advent of the Trump administration, new terror attacks, not just Islamic terror attacks, but all sorts of terror attacks. Don't forget, the CIA was in control of Al-Qaeda, and ISIS is just Al-Qaeda. So let's get into the headlines for today, January 2nd. All right, first up, we're going to start with the Wall Street Journal that states the obvious. New Year's violence rattles U.S. New Orleans attack and Las Vegas explosion come as authorities have warned of rising threats. So, authorities have, Christopher Wray and many others in authority and government authority have warned that the United States is susceptible to terror attacks because of the open border, most specifically. Now, what happens, if you did not know, is the left is backed into a corner and liberals, Democrats, the liberal establishment controls Islamic terror. The radicals who commit the attacks maybe do so with the unwitting guidance of the United States government and clandestine groups therein. So let's get into some of the headlines for today, having to deal with what we know are terror attacks, two different terror attacks, but we're going to talk about the similarities. And I'm already having. So first up is the Associated Press. This is from the 15th of December. White House releases national strategy to combat Islamophobia. Now, why would the United States launch a program or national strategy to combat Islamophobia? Now, after 9/11, it was apparent that a lot of people who didn't understand Islam, Arabs, people from that part of the world, the Middle East and Far East, didn't understand what Islam was, and purportedly the people that conducted the attack on 9/11 were Sunni Muslim Wahhabists. But Americans turn their anger onto anybody who wore a turban, including people that are Sikh. And Sikhs are not Muslim. Just because they wear a turban doesn't mean someone is Muslim. So let's look at the date from this article by Will Wessert, a literative reporter here for the Associated Press, was on December 12th. And the story goes on to say the White House on Thursday announced what it called for the first ever national strategy to counter Islamophobia, dealing with 100 steps federal officials are taking to curb hate, violence, bias, and discrimination against Muslim and Arab Americans. The proposal follows similar national plan to battle anti-Semitism that President Joe Biden unveiled in May, as fears about increasing hatred and discrimination were rising among U.S. Jews. Well, this happened basically because of what was happening in Gaza. So, but why would the Biden administration put forth a program to combat Islamophobia when you don't have a catalyst that would steer up Islamophobia? Goes on to say officials worked on the anti-Islamophobia plan for months, and its release came 5 weeks before Biden leaves office. The White House said the bulk of its actions had been implemented with a goal to roll out the rest before Inauguration Day on January 20th. Why is that? When President-elect Donald Trump takes office. Well, why do you think that is? Well, the reason is they knew the terror attacks were coming. Two things. So they are aiding militant Islam, not just in the Middle East to topple the Assad government in Syria, but to reconstitute their alliance with militant Islam outside of the purview of the Saudis. Because, as I mentioned previously, previous Saudi rulers in the monarchy worked with the left to export Wahhabist ideology, jihadist ideology, and Islamic militancy. Well, during the coup, the coup of the monarchy in Saudi Arabia under the Trump administration that culminated in the assassination of journalist Adnan Khashoggi, who was going to report on the coup, but most people don't really know what happened, that the new prince, MBS, promised Trump, after Trump and the Russians decimated ISIS, that Saudi Arabia would no longer export militant Islam, which they did. But now the left has a partner in Turkey, and obviously now in Syria, and we're going to talk about the acronym ISIL and ISIS. Well, ISIS refers to an Egyptian deity, and we're not going to get into that too much, but we're going to get a little bit more into the headlines here for today, January 2nd. So we know about the attacks. This is the Associated Press. Death toll New Orleans crash rises to 15, coroner says. A driver behind the wheel of an electric pickup truck rammed New Year's revelers in New Orleans, killing at least 15 and injuring 30. So we know that. Also from the New York Post, New Orleans terror attack. Terrorist made videos where he confessed to planning the murder. His family claimed he joined ISIS. I think I missed the text here. So what I want to talk about today is the obvious connections. And when the establishment, when the intelligence services launch covert attacks, you have to go back and study Gladio, Operation Gladio, which was a NATO operation, to understand what they're doing. Now, what they're doing is creating terror, obviously. But just like all the other mass shootings, school shootings or whatever, that are supposed to cause terror among the U.S. populace for a variety of different reasons. But what we understand is that what they try to do is confound you, confuse you over what the motivations may be. Now, going back to what I said before, which was the CIA controls Al-Qaeda. ISIS is Al-Qaeda. It's just rebrand, okay, with a little bit of nationalist fervor. What they want to do is create a caliphate. But it's not very different than the Ba'ath Party in Iraq and Syria, which was pan-Arab, because it was more secular than it was Islamic. But ISIS wants to reconstitute the Muslim caliphate of the 5th century. So let's take another look at the headlines here. New York Post: driver of Tesla Cybertruck killed in explosion outside Trump Las Vegas hotel is ID'd as Army vet Matthew Livelsberger. What do we know? Well, we know Livelsberger, like the suspect in New Orleans, is ex-military. Why is that important? I'm going to get to that in just a second. So, what are the similarities? I'm going to get into all of those, but they were both electronic vehicles. Why is that important? Because intelligence services use connections to tell stories. So it's significant that they're electric vehicles, but why would, let's say, a Muslim terrorist, somebody who's just recently radicalized, why would they use an electric vehicle? There's no rhyme or reason. Why not use a gasoline-powered vehicle? We don't know. But there is a connection there. I think it's part of a narrative. Article goes on to say the vehicles in both New Orleans attack and Trump Las Vegas hotel Tesla explosion, it's also a terror attack, were rented using the app Turo, officials said. Livelsberger, like Jabbar, had served in the Army, according to Denver 7. Now, this guy Livelsberger was from Colorado. So both travel distances, fairly long distances. So the suspect in the New Orleans attack lived in Texas. So he traveled from Texas to New Orleans and apparently took the electric truck that he rented on Turo, which is it's not a ride share app, but it's like Airbnb, but for your car. You can allow other people to rent your vehicle. Both use the app Turo to rent vehicles, so there's the similarity. Both rented electric trucks, which I'm not sure why you would do that. So there is a connection between the two. Now, the intelligence services are going to say there's no connection in the attacks. What is the other attack connection? Well, obviously the timing. Timing is always suspect. So they both took place on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, New Year's Eve in the morning, New Year's Day, within hours of each other. Both are using electric trucks. Both were rented on the same app. Both were Army veterans. Both were attacks on the United States. One directly aimed at the president-elect Donald Trump, it happened in front of his hotel in Las Vegas, using a Tesla, which is connected to Elon Musk, who is a supporter of the Trump administration. Why is all this important? Well, first, the most important connection besides the timing is they were both in the U.S. military. Now, I'm going to get into the identity of the guy Jabbar in a minute. But the guy Jabbar is an Arab, but supposedly was not Muslim and just recently converted to Islam. I don't believe that that's true. And recently got radicalized according to his brother, and we're going to get into that too. But they're both were in the military. Why is that important? That is the most important thing, because these attacks, from my point of view, were carried out by American intelligence. Why? To keep the Trump administration on its back foot and use the guise of radical terror, leftist terror, but also Islamic terror, to attack the American people who put Trump into office and Trump himself. So if anything happens, we know that Trump can be targeted. So let's first look at the military. Does anybody know what sheep dipped is? Most of you might. Let me just explain it for those who don't. This is a quote from the book, The Secret Team. Sheep dipped is an intricate army devised process by which a man or woman who is in the service as a full career soldier or officer agrees to go through all the legal and official motions of resigning from the service. Then, rather than actually being released, his records are pulled from the Army personnel files and transferred to a special Army intelligence file. Substitute, but nonetheless real appearing records are then processed, and the man, quote unquote, leaves the service. He is encouraged to write to his friends and give a cover reason why he got out. He goes to his bank account and charge card services and changes his status to civilian. This is the important part. And does the hundreds of other official and personal things that a man would do if he really got out, a man or woman would do if he really got out of the service. Meanwhile, his real Army records are kept in secrecy but not forgotten. And if his contemporaries are promoted, he gets promoted. All the things that can be done for his hidden records to keep him even with his peers are done. Some very real problems arise when he gets killed or captured. We're not even going to get into that because they don't apply here. So now you have to add into sheep dipped, which a person that once served in the military is secretly still commanded by military intelligence and or CIA and or whoever. Because sheep dip doesn't always mean you go over to military intelligence. Sheep dip came from when we were still fighting the Vietnam War. This is very old terminology. What it really means is that you were property of the government at one point. You officially leave the service and are indoctrinated into covert intelligence operations, wittingly, unwittingly controlled by mind control and other techniques used to make you. Now, this has been portrayed in many movies, not only the Bourne Supremacy movies, the Bourne Identity movies, but also other movies, which just happens time and time again. The DC Sniper, okay, he was in the military. So you see this often when people commit violent terror attacks, that they have some connection to the U.S. military. Dr. Hassan, who was the Fort Hood shooting, he was obviously in the military. He was in Fort, but he was supposedly doing it for Islam. The point, the Navy Yard shooting. Now, the guy was never in, this guy was in the military at one point, but then was supposed to be in the Navy Yard because he was working on network computers or something, some IT. But he was supposed to be a civilian. But, as I believe, he was being trained to be an attacker, but his training went awry and he actually attacked the people that were training him. So look into the Navy Yard shooting. Also important to look at. So sheep dip is important, but it's not like it was done in Vietnam where you go from the Army into Army intelligence, but you go from the Army into mind control or CIA or other programs that turn you into a mindless killing machine to take part in terrorist activity, i.e. Operation Gladio, which was a NATO thing. So let's move on here. Let's go to the New Orleans attack. They talked about bollards. You might have heard this during the press conference. This is a bollard, if you can see the picture here. So it's like a pylon that is removable or retractable, that it retracts into the pavement, and that can be brought up at different times to close streets or close sidewalks or what have you. So the thing about the bollards in this attack is that he drove up on the sidewalk and avoided the bollards. This is from the Post-Millennial. FBI confirms multiple IEDs found in the French Quarter. Shamsun Din Jabbar, who was the Arab, he was American, but of Arab descent, not solely responsible for New Orleans terror attack. We do not believe that Jabbar is solely responsible. We are aggressively running down every lead included in this unknown associates. Now, what intelligence services do when they hatch these terror attacks, whether it's an assassination attempt, what you saw with Crooks, or many other so-called terror attacks, is how come the explosives never go off? Never once. You go all the way back to Columbine. Now, these guys built bombs. None of their bombs went off. Crooks' bombs never went off. This terror attack, supposedly Islamic, their bombs didn't go off. And they're pretty adept. ISIS is pretty adept at making bombs. Maybe not shoe bombs. But because these terror, in my belief, these terror events are created. People are supposed to die, obviously. However, things like explosives are hard to control. So let's move on to other headlines here. Here's one from the New York Post. What is Turo rental app used by both New Orleans terrorists and Trump Vegas hotel Cybertruck bombing? You think there's a connection? Because they're told by the same intelligence agency how to rent the vehicles. Now, here's a little bit from the Post-Millennial on the attacker in New Orleans. Shamsun Din Jabbar converted to Islam within the past year. I don't really believe that. Writings indicate terror attack inspired by ISIS. Sources told CNN that the writings further reinforced the theory that the attack was inspired by ISIS. ISIS is the CIA. ISIS is the CIA as much as U.S. aid is the CIA. ISIS was created by the CIA. U.S. aid was created by the State Department, but it's a cover for the CIA. So let's go into other headlines here. The Associated Press, Islamic State-inspired driver expressed desire to kill before the deadly New Orleans rampage. He did. The driver defeated safety measures in place to protect pedestrians. The bollards were retracted. The sidewalk bollards. Why was this? And was hell-bent on creating carnage and the damage that he did. What they're saying is there were bollards on the sidewalk to prevent such an attack. Why weren't they up? They weren't. This is, again, leaving the door open for an attack. There was also a deadly explosion in Honolulu. That wasn't connected. That was a fireworks attack. A fireworks explosion. And Jabbar was wearing camouflage. I don't know why he was wearing camouflage. What, are you going to blend into the, doesn't make any sense. But he was wearing camouflage and wearing a ballistic vest and helmet. So body armor and a helmet here. Now, the funny thing is always when you see these people, agents of the state, wearing camouflage. You saw this at Sandy Hook as well, where you had somebody captured in the woods wearing camo pants. Camo pants are a favorite of attackers. I don't know why. Especially if you're attacking in an urban environment. Is the camouflage going to help you? It's part of the militancy mindset. You want to dress up as a soldier. So we'll get back to the headlines here. One of the most important is from BBC. Police probe if blast at Trump hotel is linked to New Orleans attack. I think they are, but not for the obvious reasons. The FBI also said that the agency was looking into the incident may be an act of terrorism. It was act of terror. Why would you blow up a car in front of Trump Tower? And the authorities said they currently had not confirmed the identity of the driver who died in the vehicle. Also said thus far they found no evidence that this incident was related to ISIS. Why would obviously there's no evidence. It's linked to ISIS. And like I said before, this is meant to confound and confuse you. They happened at the same time. They rented rented electric trucks from the same app, and they happened on the same day. Now, these aren't spur of the moment, take a gun out into the street and start shooting people. These things are planned. So, is there a connection between Jabbar and this other guy? Probably not. But the connection is I believe that the agencies that planned this with them knew that the attacks were going to happen at the same time and planned for that completely. Let's go on to other headlines here. New York Post, New Orleans terrorist Shamsuddin Jabbar's brother blames radicalization for the attack that left 15 dead. The younger Jabbar told the newspaper that the brother did not represent Islam. They all say that. And I'm not bashing Islam. I'm just saying that this guy was obviously Muslim for some time. This is more some type of radicalization, not religion, his brother said. Yeah, the radicalization happens online, and it's not always done by ISIS. Why is ISIS allowed to radicalize people, but conservatives can't talk about certain medical procedures or certain election irregularities? This is the problem, is because, as I said before, ISIS, not the people that fight under the banner of Islam, radical Islam, militant Islam, whatever, they don't know they're working for the CIA. But the CIA has control. Now, nobody wants to hear that, but you have to have funding, and there's always someone running your ass. It's not some friggin' guy, some Muslim cleric in a cave in the middle of fucking nowhere. It's not how it works. How does some Muslim cleric get the New Orleans police to keep the bollards down on the sidewalk right where the attack occurs? Look at the attack that happened in Germany. Again, there were sidewalk barriers that weren't erected to prevent such a thing, because they knew about how these attacks happened in Paris. But again, just like you see in school shootings, they have security measures, but they're not in place, coincidentally, right at the time of the attack. Very bizarre. So the New York Post goes on to say in the videos posted on his Facebook page, Shasmuddin Jabbar pledged allegiance to ISIS. How convenient. I mean, of course he did. But how? So there's not a connection between that and what's obviously political terrorism at the Trump Hotel. But there's still some similarities. They both use electric trucks, both rented on Turo, and they are both in the U.S. Armed Services. He also confessed he planned on murdering his family in one of the videos. Again, apparently U.S. intelligence and all the other tech titans are vacuuming up all your online information. But somebody who pledges allegiance to ISIS and says he planned on murdering his family, those guys don't get flagged. But if you talk about certain medical procedures or certain election integrity issues, then you get flagged. Or if you go to Washington, D.C. and happen to use a Bank of America credit card, and you go to a Trump rally on January 6, 2020, then you get flagged. But if you're online claiming allegiance to ISIS and say you're going to kill your family, nobody knows. Or you're a student in a high school who's been reported to law enforcement myriads of times, you don't get flagged there. Or you get reported to the FBI and you don't get flagged. Or you're an Army reservist who's going crazy and saying he's going to kill a bunch of people. And your fellow serviceman alerts the Army Reserve that I think this guy's going to go shoot up people in Maine. Nothing happens. Or supposedly an ex-FBI, once FBI, always FBI, ex-FBI employee, agent, communicates with the Buffalo shooter right before he commits his horrific act. And that ex-FBI agent doesn't warn the FBI that he's been talking to this guy and the guy seems like he's going to commit violence. No, that doesn't happen. Wall Street Journal is reporting the descent of an Army vet turned corporate consultant named in the New Year's attack. Texas born and bred, they had to put it in there. He's not a foreign terrorist. Yeah, okay. Shamsuddin Jabbar had worked at Deloitte before plowing a truck with an Islamic State flag into a New Orleans crowd. Post-Millennial says Senator John Kennedy, senator for Louisiana, responds to the New Orleans massacre, vows to raise fresh hell if details about the attack are not made public. Now, why would Senator Kennedy say that? He goes on to say, I will promise you this. When it's appropriate and the investigation is complete, you will find out what happened and who was responsible, or I will raise fresh hell. Now, he's referring to motive. Now, obviously, if you wave an ISIS flag and, why you would pledge, if you're about to plan an attack, why would you go online and pledge allegiance to ISIS before the attack? You might get found out by the authorities. Not if the authorities are running you. The point being is, what is the motive? Okay, what's the motive in Las Vegas? Obviously, political terrorism. And they kept saying, the right wing is going to attack, the right wing is going to attack. Political violence. All the political violence that has been perpetrated in this country has been done by radicals on the left. Go look at the history. So the story goes on to say, Louisiana Senator John Kennedy responded to the New Year's Day attack in New Orleans that left at least 10 dead and 30 others injured. It's 15 dead, actually. Condemning the attack as objective evil and promised to raise fresh hell if the federal authorities do not release details about their investigation once complete. Because this sounds familiar, like the Trump incident. For those people who don't believe in objective evil, all you have to do is look at what happened in our city this morning. Of course, it's objective evil. I don't really know what he means by that. Catch these people and then tell the American people the truth. Don't wait 25 years or 30 years or whatever. Like the Kennedy assassination, who even Tucker Carlson came out and said the CIA was responsible. Now, the reason that's important is because that is the bellwether. That is the watershed revelation that if the CIA is involved in the assassination of the United States democratically elected president, what would stop them from carrying out terror attacks on our own soil, presumably with the help of the FBI? Now, look at the Boston bombing, look at all these attacks. You can go back to 9/11 and look at that. It's a bunch of bullshit. The narrative that these Chechen kids, actually Tamerlan Tsarnaev, who supposedly was killed, and if you look at the released autopsy photo, it's a bunch of bullshit. And that's the thing, is I have a little bit of expertise in photographic manipulation, and time again, when it comes down, particularly there were several incidents surrounding the Boston bombing, where there were released photographs that you could see were altered digitally, including the autopsy photo of Tamerlan, but that goes without saying. But these two kids, now, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the kid who's in a dark hole that no media can touch, that you can never answer any questions, or, you don't get to hear anything from the kid, supposedly because he had fireworks in his backpack, that he's a terrorist. What young kid never had fireworks in their backpack? Come on. So you will never hear from him again. His execution wasn't stayed by the Biden administration. And Tamerlan is out of the country somewhere. These guys Tamerlan was known to be a CIA asset. And the Russians even contacted the United States to say so. There's still no motive why the Tsarnaev brothers bombed a marathon on, what was it? Freedom Day, Liberty Day, or something like that. Something associated with the American Revolution. Didn't make any sense, because they were the fallback narrative, because apparently at the Boston bombing, Alex Jones, of all people, picked some guy out of the crowd and said he's the person of an interest, that he's going to be blamed for the Boston bombing because he was the patsy that they were going to pin it on and associate it with right-wing liberty movements. So what do we got? We got sheep-dip military guys who used the same mode of attack, strangely both electric vehicles, both rented through the app Turo, which most people have never heard of. So how would both these guys know? And of course you have the connection of timing. They were done within hours of each other. But they're disparate enough to cause you to be confused. One was done politically motivated, left-wing political motivation, as you will see, and the other Islamic terror, but they're both controlled by the same organization, in my humble opinion. All right, let's get on to, there's other news here, so we need to get on to other headlines for today, Thursday, January 2nd. Also, I just want to take this opportunity to ask you to please engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, give me a thumbs up, share the podcast. All these things, all the engagement, helps my channel. So it's not like I get money or anything out of it. I'm not even at that point. But the more engagement gets the algorithm to share me more. And so then I get more viewers. And at one point, hopefully, we can make an difference with these crazy subjective theories, these conspiracy theories. All right, more news. The Federalist, Fairfax County public schools push radical trans activism against parents' wishes. And what are we talking about here is that you thought woke was dead. It's not dead. The same kind of extremists who hijacked the Democratic Party at the national level are ones pushing transgender ideology indoctrination at early ages in public schools and running Fairfax County's once flagship district into the ground. In this article by Stephanie Aurora. Now, where's Fairfax County? They're talking about Virginia. Fairfax County public school officials, including Superintendent Michelle Reed, and the district's 12 Democratic-endorsed school board members are continuing their efforts to force gender ideology indoctrination at increasingly early ages. So they were able to do this psychological operation in the midst of COVID because everybody was emotionally and psychologically traumatized. And now it's part of the left agenda. And the point is that it's harmful and it is meant to undermine social cohesion. And that might not mean a lot to you or I, but it means a lot to the communist Chinese. Well, what do I mean by that? If you know what the Russian Soviets had done, cultural Marxist warfare or undermining ideology, ideological subversion. Where is this also present? Just the News is reporting DEI hard. Ohio State diversity payroll, China funding scrutinized as alum J.D. Vance becomes Veep. What does that mean? Well, I don't know why they put the fact that J.D. Vance is an alum. It doesn't mean anything. Taxpayer Transparency Watchdog opened the book, sacked the Buckeyes in a report Monday on its diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracy, including 201 employees with DEI-related roles, who last year cost $13.3 million, which it said could pay in-state tuition for 1,000 students, but is going to the bureaucracy itself. Ohio State University's foreign funding includes $15.8 million from China since 2013, which that year snuck a spy into OSU to exfiltrate research funded by American taxpayers. Zhou Guangzheng escaped notice until he tried to flee back to China 7 years later and went to prison for making false statements to the feds for an immunology research fraud scheme. What does that mean? That means the Chinese communists are funding DEI. And with the funding, a lot of these universities, including Harvard, let Chinese scientists into university research programs that compromise sensitive research, especially in the biological area. And seeing what happened with COVID, that has to be scrutinized. But also, they help fund things that are ideologically subversive, like DEI and transgender issues. Also from Just the News, no matter how MAGA debate ends, H-1B visas have an undeniable fraud problem. I don't really need to get into the text because the headline says it all. But for those who you don't know, 2 federal criminal cases affirmed longstanding warnings that the government's H-1B visa programs was ripe for fraud and slow to bring accountability. The cases in California and Illinois brought some long-awaited justice to schemes that have tried to help companies rig a system, help companies, corporations, I should say, rig a system designed for narrow high-tech skills to instead hire foreigners for jobs that should have gone to Americans. For a variety of different reasons that I said in the last program, the last episode, that H-1B is on its face good, but in real life bad, because it walls out American citizens from getting those jobs because foreigners are easier controlled. They can get paid less. And when you increase the job pool in certain industries and certain positions, it keeps the pay low. Whether you think that's a good or bad thing, that's another thing entirely. Also goes on to say in October 2017, the Homeland Security Inspector General warned that UCCIS tactics for providing oversight to the program, which is the organization in charge of doing so, mainly site visits, provide minimal assurance that H-1B participants are compliant and not engage in fraudulent activity. It's really the people that make the applications, which is the corporations that try to get these people. Efforts have been widely panned on both sides of the political spectrum as an ineffective or nibbling around the ends of a persistent fraud temptation. I'd say it's insufficient. Former U.S. immigration official Robert Law, the director of the Center for Homeland Security and Immigration and the Trump-aligned America First Policy Institute, said last year after Biden crackdown began. I don't think the Biden administration has done anything in the H-1B space that puts integrity into the system and accountability. And a lot of times, if you didn't know, a lot of times this is just the Biden administration or any administration say, hey, look, we're doing our part. We're fighting Islamophobia, or we're trying to do XYZ, when a lot of the policies they put into place are just toothless. They're made for a narrative like the administration is doing something when actually it does nothing, and in some instances actually help the problem they're trying to address. There's some breaking news here from Mediaite. Biden announces Liz Cheney to receive Presidential Citizens Medal. What a joke. Can't believe it. The President's Citizens Medal is awarded to citizens of the United States of America who have performed exemplary deeds of service for their country and their fellow citizens, like witness tampering and election subversion and the jailing of trespassers at the Capitol. So witness tampering and the destruction of evidence, because all the evidence that was collected by the January 6th committee was destroyed. Why would that be? That's property of the people. See, the taxpayer pays you, so it's work for hire. So any work you complete is property of the taxpayer. More on January 6th news. One American News is reporting January 6th prosecutor Matthew Graves is resigning before the Trump inauguration. He will leave his post just 4 days before Trump will return to the White House. I wonder why that is. Well, Trump plans to pardon a lot of these people that were jailed for January 6th for simple trespass. Graves' January 6th investigation led to 1,572 people having been charged. Almost 600 were charged with assaulting, resisting, or impeding law enforcement agents or officers. And some of the latter there are a little bit, I don't know, impeding law agents or officers. So agent, who's the agent? Who's the officer? Impeding them how? Were you just standing in their way? I mean, I don't really, anybody assaulting a police officer, that's a different thing. Resisting a police officer in that sort of riotous environment, I don't think resisting, like an officer grabs you and you pull your arm away. You mean you have to go to prison for that? Come on. An additional 171 defendants were also charged with using deadly or dangerous weapons or causing serious bodily injury to an officer. I didn't see any weapons. What do you mean, a flagpole? Yeah. The whole thing was sort of a setup. I want to say sort of, is because people went there and trespassed. You know you can't go into the Capitol. You could go onto Capitol grounds, you could wave your sign, wave your flag, you could chant your slogans. But that's why Ray Epps is so integral to the investigation. The pipe bombs also, but Ray Epps and the pipe bombs. Because Ray Epps said we got to go into the Capitol. He didn't say we got to tell those motherfuckers what for. He kept telling people we have to go into the Capitol. Now that's a crime. That's trespass. The majority of people who were charged, more than half, were charged with simple trespass. All under the urging of Ray Epps. Got to go into the, why do you have to go in? Why do you have to go into the Capitol? The point is there were politicians on January 6th that were trying to get a stay or a pause on certification so they can investigate election irregularities. Supposed. The pawn at the helm of the DOJ's targeting of Joe Biden's political opponents was Matthew Graves. The swamp, no justice is coming, says Andy Biggs, representative of Arizona, Republican. They do know justice is coming. Whether it'll be served or not is another question. The whole point, the point of the program here too, is that you got to think outside the box. You're not just fighting Matthew Graves. It's not just Merrick Garland. It's a bureaucracy that particularly the Obama administration put in place, because the thing is, you have to understand about OFA and organizing and mind control and getting people to drink the blue Kool-Aid is that once they're put into place, they're serving, they think they're serving the bureaucracy, but they're serving a leftist ideology or which is anti-Trump by its nature, but whatever. So we're talking about justice here and whether Elon Musk is going to get justice. But Reuters flips it on his head and says, as Musk gains influence, questions hover over U.S. probes into his empire. What are they talking about? Last month, in the waning days of the Biden administration, the SEC set a tight deadline of several days for demanding that Elon Musk pay a settlement or face civil charges relating to the alleged security violations during his $44 billion takeover of Twitter. What? Musk's potential to have extraordinary clout with the new administration raises questions on the fate of the federal investigations, regulatory actions affecting his business empire, of which at least 20 are ongoing. The whole point, the whole reason that SpaceX was sabotaged and that there are 20 ongoing investigations into Musk's businesses is because A, he bought Twitter, then opened it up for free speech. Not only that, what pissed people off is that he let investigators in to look at the Twitter files, which basically shows the fascist mentality and the fascist nature of corporate fascism, that the fact that it's in bed with the federal government. That the federal government got investigators to go in and censor speech at the behest of the federal government, but also on the behest of the corporation itself. Because they're in league to do the same thing. It's the corporate college that governments are subservient to. I mean, you can look at it, you look at organizations like the EU, supranational organizations like the EU or the UN are controlled by corporations, the WHO, what have you. So the fact is that these cases were brought against X and Elon Musk because he was siding with the conservatives, with the libertarians, the people that want to remain free. And so he started smashing the narrative and the New World Order agenda, which is one world government and corporate fascism at the top, the banking at the top with censorship and draconian measures on all the people. Zip through some headlines here, because we only got about 5 minutes. National Review, federalism isn't a partisan fallback, it's a foundation. What are they talking about here? The left's new emphasis on state authority reflects not an appreciation for federalism, but partisan maneuvering until Democrats regain control of Washington. What are they talking about? Federalism just means state power. States have the power. And so now the Democrats are saying we're going to fight the federal government using state power, but you can't shield people who break federal laws. That's not the point. But you can. You can buck the federal government when it overreaches. Now, going after illegal immigrants is not a federal overreach, and that's why states' rights is particularly a right-wing point of view, because it's federalism. Just the News reports truckers want to put the brakes on EV regulations in Washington State. What the Excuse me, a little tech difficulty. Washington State is tied to California's Advanced Clean Trucks program, which directs trucking industry to transition to zero emissions for medium and heavy-duty trucks. Depending on the class of truck in the year, electric vehicles must make up a certain percentage of sales. For class 4 through 8 trucks, for example, half of all sales must be EVs by 2030. Also from the National Review, assisted suicide death ceremonies becoming normalized. And this reporter, Wesley Smith, talks about his experience with assisted suicide, which is just euthanasia. Thanks to assisted suicide movement, suicide parties and ceremonies are becoming common. Reuters, Russia gas era in Europe ends as Ukraine stops transit. Gazprom, Russian gas exports via Soviet-era pipelines running through Ukraine came to a halt on New Year's Day, marking the end of decades of Moscow's dominance over Europe's gas energy markets. The gas has kept flowing despite nearly 3 years of war, but Russia's gas firm Gazprom said it had stopped at 5 General Mountain Time, 5 o'clock, after Ukraine refused to renew a transit agreement. Again, the war, Ukraine, Europe, NATO, basically putting the brakes on energy imports from Russia. International Business Times, Milan said no to outdoor smoking. Stay with me now. Milan says no to outdoor smoking in Italy's toughest ban. Now, this isn't the federal government of Maloney. This is just Milan says no to outdoor smoking. The new law is excessive in my opinion. I agree not to smoke indoors, not to smoke near an elderly person or child, but banning smoking outdoors for me somewhat limits a person's freedom. Indeed. It's like you shouldn't have to wear a mask outdoors and you could smoke outdoors. Is that it? We made it just under the wire there.
13, Sergeant 1 Essential.
I had to rush there a little bit at the end. I don't want to go more than an hour. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe. Please leave a comment, give me a thumbs up, click that notification bell, share the podcast. All right. Don't forget you're under attack psychologically and biologically. But psychologically, specifically with these terror attacks, which will continue throughout the Trump administration, from the left, from anti-capitalists, but also from the left's favorite militants, Islamic militants. But don't you dare get Islamophobia, because the Biden administration, or the legacy of the Biden administration, will come after you with their anti-Islamophobia, strangely coinciding with fresh Islamic attacks on the United States. Supposedly, they are under the guise of. It's really intelligence services, NATO, and others organizing these attacks. Join me every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. on Rumble. Check out my other website, limpop.org. Learn about libertarian populism. I might not have a episode tomorrow. I'm a little sick still, but I've got a work project I got to take care of, so I will probably see you next week. Maybe over the weekend have a special report. I'm sorry I didn't have a Tuesdays with Perry this week. We tried to make it happen on New Year's Eve, and both of us had too much going on, so next week. Stay hip to the trip, and I'll see you next week. Respect.
Never did I imagine this getting profiled, trying to buy me a bag of chips. West Coast and bad to slip, but these slopes is all I got to walk on, so my hope is plenty invested in my efforts to stress in the segments of cops stopping and ask me questions. I didn't do the crimes they suggested, but they felt it important to take me in for questioning. I get mad and give their ass a piece of a mind with no piece at that time I was released, but already screwed. Hadn't already missed my interview. Applying to Al Bundy, some women's shoes, whatever to make rent, but now I lose. What can I do? But anywho, who else feels it? Even after you get paid broke in a bill.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.